Thank you for joining the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Northwestern Division for tonight's Missouri River Basin Water Management Virtual Public Meeting. I am Eileen Williamson, and I will be moderating today's call. This webinar is being recorded and will be placed on the Defense Video and Imagery Distribution System website at www.dvidS-HUB.net/unit/USACE-NWD. Your participation acknowledges your consent to be recorded. Today we will discuss current conditions and the projected operation of the MAINSTEM reservoir system as part of the draft annual operating plan, which was released in mid-September for public comment. The agenda includes a message from Northwestern Division Commander, Brigadier General Pete Helmlinger, an introduction from Mr. John Remus, Chief of the Missouri River Water Management Division, Mr. Doug Cluck with NOAA, Mr. Kevin Lau with the Missouri River Basin Forecast Center, Mr. Kevin Brody with Missouri River Water Management Division, and Mr. Mike Swenson, Missouri River Water Management Division. During their presentations, I will use the webinar chat function to share links on our website relevant to the presentation. I encourage you to submit your questions, which we will answer at the end of the call using the chat function. I also ask that you refrain from using the chat function to hold discussion. Questions should be focused on Missouri River water management and river operations. Questions not on this topic will be directed offline to the appropriate point of contact. Following their presentations, we'll move into the question and answer session. Questions will be answered in the following order. First, questions submitted prior to today via the NWD website. Second, questions submitted in the webinar chat function. And finally, we will call for questions from the phone lines. All lines have been placed on mute. Please be aware that the forced mute function does not work on all phones, so if I ask, please use your phone's own mute function to avoid interrupting the call. Do not place the call on hold. With that, I will turn it over to you, General Helmlinger.
Hey, great. Thank you, Eileen. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brigadier General Pete Helmlinger, Commander of the Corps' Northwestern Division. And I want to thank you for taking the time to join us for our fall virtual public meeting. Participation in public meetings by all with a vested interest, including elected officials, tribal leaders, industry, media, and the general public, ensures a common understanding of our goals and requirements when making decisions on Missouri River operations. As we said last spring, when COVID-19 first emerged, we would much rather be meeting with you in person. However, given the ongoing pandemic and guidance to limit in-person gatherings, these virtual meetings are the next best way to maintain our commitment to provide everyone in the Missouri River Basin the information you need to know about the status of the Missouri River MAINSTEM reservoir system and possible operations or water release adjustments. More importantly, however, these meetings are our opportunity to hear from you. We value your input and encourage you to submit your questions to our water management staff during this meeting or through the Missouri River Basin Water Management website. 2020 has been an unusual year as we transition from evacuating excessive floodwater to managing the system to meet downstream flow targets. The flooding in 2018 and 2019 damaged both flood control and navigation infrastructure, and the Corps is working to repair this damage as quickly as possible. Before I turn the meeting over to the Missouri River Basin Water Management staff, I want to encourage each of you to remain engaged. Continue to watch the weather and water management forecast and ask questions of my staff whenever you feel the need. So thank you all once again for joining us tonight, and I look forward to the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll turn the meeting over to John Remus.
Thank you, Eileen, and good evening. As Eileen said, I'm John Remus, Chief of the Missouri River Basin Water Management Division. Our office is responsible for regulating the Missouri River MAINSTEM reservoir system. I will provide some general remarks before the technical discussion. As General Helmlinger stated, this is an opportunity for us to provide information to you and for you to provide comments and ask questions of us. While the primary focus of the meeting is management of the Missouri River MAINSTEM reservoir system, we understand that there may be related topics that you may want to comment on. If that is the case, please do not hesitate to provide those comments. If you are reading from a prepared statement, please email that document to either Kevin Grody, Mike Swenson, or me, or you can email it to the Missouri Water Management inbox. Those email addresses are provided at the end of the presentation. Also, we have a limited amount of time, so I ask that you keep your questions and comments as brief as possible to allow time for everyone to comment. For those of you that have attended our public meetings in the past, you will notice that we have abbreviated the presentation. This will allow more time for questions and answers. Also, as General Helminger pointed out, we have shifted our management focus from evacuation of floodwater to meeting downstream flow targets. However, I want to assure everyone in the basin that the Corps remains fully committed to our flood risk reduction mission, protecting stakeholders when we can from significant hydrologic events that pose a threat to human health and safety. We are also committed to supporting the authorized purposes as outlined in the Master Manual. The reservoir system is in good shape from both a flood control and flow support point of view. We are currently meeting all full service navigation flow targets and will continue to do so through the end of the navigation season. Kevin Grody and Mike Swenson will provide more details in a few minutes. We will continue to meet our statutory obligations to operate the Missouri River MAINSTEM reservoir system for its authorized purposes, as they are described in the Water Control Manual. We will continue to comply with all laws, including the Endangered Species Act, and will comply with the 2008 biological opinion. This concludes my remarks. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions and comments. Now I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Doug Cluck from NOAA.
Thanks, John. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yep, we got you just fine. Thanks.
All right. So my name is Doug Cluck. Work for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, National Centers for Environmental Information. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happened, and then a little bit about what's going to happen. Well, theoretically, what's going to be happening across the basin this winter and maybe early spring. So why don't we get right to? Oh, and also thanks to the Corps for inviting us to this, and thanks for all of you for listening. So next slide, please. So here are 3 maps of soil moisture, and we're going to start in the upper left-hand corner. And soil moisture is very important to the basin in terms of memory in the system. If you remember, in March of this year, we were sitting very wet, and you can see by the green coloring of the upper left corner national map there that wherever it's green, it's above normal in terms of soil moisture. It's the anomaly, if you will. Where it's white, it's near normal, and where it's sort of yellowish or red, then we're drier than normal. So in March, we were kind of worried. We had quite a bit of rain and precipitation last year, and actually the year before that, 2018, 2019, both. But since about March, we've gone through quite a change and quite of a drying out process where you can look at the next map over to the right. This is the month of October sort of averaged. But the real key here is that we've gone from green to yellow to orange to sort of almost red in some cases in terms of soil moisture. And that's very important in terms of this basin in terms of both drought conditions and flood conditions. It's something we monitor all the time. So you can see most of the basin was green. Now it's shifted, as you'll see from a couple other maps that my colleague in NOAA, Kevin Lau, will show in terms of drought, how drought has expanded, but definitely how soil moisture has decreased. And then the final map, that really isn't much different, is November 1st's map on the left of soil moisture, really showing deficits in terms of normal across the basin. For the most part. Let's go to the next slide. So we're experiencing, or we are in the process of having what we call a La Nina fall, winter, and probably at least spring. What that means is something quite the opposite of El Nino. You hear about El Nino all the time and all the destruction and stuff, and really around the world. But La Nina is sort of El Nino's little sister. So it's the opposite effect across our nation for the most part, across North America, really. It's a really different type of flow pattern, which is typical. So this is a typical winter time, and I'd say from now through, really from December, really through March, this kind of flow pattern is pretty common during a La Nina. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, doesn't mean it's going to stay that way the whole time, but this is sort of a cartoon, if you will, of the way La Ninas typically show up. So as you can see there, for the Missouri Basin, colder than normal conditions for the upper basin and are more common than not. And sometimes wetter conditions, although it doesn't show it very well, but wetter conditions slip into Montana and sometimes further east as well. And then to the south, across the southern part of the U.S., it's all dry and usually warmer for the most part, basically from Colorado all the way from coast to coast, with the exception of sort of this Ohio River basin. But anyway, let's pay more attention to the Missouri Basin. Let's go to the next slide. This is just the outlook for the month of November and only November. So what we see here on the left are the temperature outlooks in terms of probability. This shows for the upper basin something we call EC, which is equal chances of above, below, or near normal. In other words, the predictability up there of what it's going to be in terms of temperature for the month is indeterminate at this point. It could be an equal chance of any of those things happening. But as you kind of slip further south, south and east anyway, there's a tendency for those numbers, those probabilities to increase, meaning that there's a better chance of warmer temperatures across the southern part of the basin, mid and southern part of the basin for the most part. If we look at precipitation on the right, we see kind of a similar pattern, but from a precipitation point of view. This time we see above normal probabilities in terms of, not very strong, but they're above normal anyway, for greater than normal precipitation across mostly Montana for this month, and then that EC kind of in between, which means, again, equal chances for above, below, or near normal. And then finally we slip into this sort of lighter tan shading as we go to the south, which indicates better chances for below normal precipitation in those areas, and it gets stronger as the further south you go, which makes sense if you look at the La Nina pattern generally. Let's go to the next slide. So we're starting to see a little more enhancement of that pattern that I just talked about. Again, the 3-month outlook from November through January, and again, we're averaging those 3 months out here. So you got to remember, November could be quite a bit different in terms of hot or cold or wet or dry than January. But when we average them all out, this is what we expect to see. So again, that sort of EC in terms of temperature on the left, meaning equal chances for above, below, or near normal, doesn't mean it's going to be remarkably cold or remarkably warm. Just equal chances of all of that or near normal. But as you move south, again, the tendency is for warmer than normal conditions to be prevalent. For precipitation, we see that expanded enhancement of precipitation going from basically the west coast to Minnesota. The northern tier of states have a higher probability of having above normal precipitation. In some of those places, that doesn't mean a lot. Even if we do have above normal precipitation in North Dakota, this is one of their driest times of year, so keep that in mind as well. On the other hand, it could mean quite a bit of precipitation. All we're saying is we're leaning towards, and just slightly leaning towards, above normal precipitation in that area. Again, to the south, though, you see that drier than normal those drier than normal probabilities edging up into Nebraska and such. Again, not too strong in Nebraska or Kansas or even Missouri for that matter, but it is there. In Colorado, same thing. Next slide. And then when we jump to February, March, and April, again, averaging out those 3 months in terms of temperature on the left and precipitation on the right, we see a definite enhancement of chances for below normal temperatures to the north. Excuse me. And so you see the blue coloring up there showing that we think that we're going to lean towards cooler than normal temperatures. Some people might think that's great. Some people may not. But as you go south, again, that tendency is to increase probabilities of above normal temperature from that February through April period. Looking at the map on the right, we see the green color sort of coming in a little stronger there, again, from West Coast all the way to the Great Lakes, for that matter, and down into the Ohio Valley. This would be a typical pattern we would see during February through April in terms of precipitation, enhanced precipitation across that area. And again, what's a little also kind of interesting is that enhanced area of less than normal precipitation sort of poking its way up through the central plains into well into Nebraska and certainly into Kansas and Colorado. Where that EC line is, or I call that the EC line or that EC gap, equal chances, that can shift south and north throughout the winter. We'll have to see where it ends up. This is our best guess at this time on where that's going to show up. Next slide. So overall, the key points are the current conditions are relatively dry, certainly much, much drier than a year ago at this time. We're in a La Nina situation. The last La Nina, and we had a question earlier today about this, but the last La Nina, in case you're interested, was in 2017 into 2018, that December through January period. The outlook is for temperatures leaning cool to the north and basically warm leaning to the south, southern part of the basin. Sorry. Precipitation leans wet to the north, especially to the north and west, and drier south, tendency for more central to southern plains dryness in the late winter into spring with these situations, with this La Nina situation. And I guess the other thing I'll say about La Ninas is they tend to be quite variable, and it can have some pretty big swings between cold and warm and wet and dry. So as usual, as we say in the weather business, stay tuned because things will change over the next few months. Last slide, next slide. If you're interested in tuning in to sort of a monthly, if you're not already part of this, and you want to listen to a monthly discussion of what's going on in the climate world, La Nina, El Nino, and all that kind of stuff, and what the outlooks are, we do this once a month. The next one is November 19th. You can sign up there, or you can write to me and say, hey, put me on the list. And either way, we'll figure it out and get you signed up. And anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug. I will turn it over to you, Kevin Lau.
Good evening. Can you hear me, Eileen?
Yes, sir.
We got you. Thank you.
All righty. Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Lau. I'm with the National Weather Service Missouri Basin River Forecast Center outside of Kansas City. Like Doug, on behalf of the National Weather Service, I'd like to thank the Corps of Engineers for inviting us to participate in this public meeting. Next slide, please. So tonight I will briefly cover 3 points. First, the current river conditions. Secondly, what the National Weather Service expects over the next 90 days with regard to the rivers. And then what the National Weather Service thinks will happen going into the spring runoff season. Next slide, please. So first, the current conditions. The Missouri River Basin has been devoid of flooding since 30 September, when the James River at Stratford, South Dakota, fell below flood stage. We did have some within bank rises across central and southern Missouri, the state of Missouri, last week due to a frontal boundary that ran up against the remnants of Zeta. And there was some flooding just south of the Missouri Basin in the state of Missouri down in the Boot Hill area. But overall, the system last week just clipped our basin. But last week's event does serve as a good reminder that flooding can occur in the southern portion of the Missouri Basin any time of the year. River response, both current and future, depends upon current snowpack, soil moisture, and current stream flow. We've lost what plains snowpack had accumulated during the month of October. Mountain snowpack has begun to build and build nicely, in fact. As Doug has already spoke about, the majority of the Missouri Basin has dry to very dry soils, as illustrated by the latest drought monitor in the lower right-hand figure. The stream flow image on the lower left is a snapshot of the stream flow conditions across the nation just prior to the freeze-up. And that's where we lose the northern gauges due to either they take the instrumentation out because to preserve the instruments, or just the rivers ice up, or the gauges don't indicate the proper stages. And so what we see there is that stream flows generally were below normal in the west and near normal in the eastern part of the Missouri Basin. Next slide, please. So the National Weather Service issues 90-day river outlooks once per month, and we'll do those more frequently come February and March. But the image that you see there on the slide represents our latest outlook, and it covers the period November through January. November through January. And the only area of the Missouri Basin that has a 50% or greater chance of seeing flooding during the next 3 months is in central and southern Missouri, and this is typical. Next slide, please. So as we look out toward the active month of March through July of 2021, here are some of the factors that we consider. Again, we're going into the fall with soil moisture drier than normal for the majority of the basin. We're going into fall with stream flows going in a downward trend. And as the Corps will talk in detail, the system storage appears to be in good shape right now. So as Doug mentioned, our climate indicator for this season is La Nina, and La Nina would tend to favor a colder winter in the northern tier of states and would favor an above normal snowpack, like in the Montana, Wyoming, maybe the western Dakotas. And so for flooding, or should I say for flood mitigation, going into winter with dry soils does help to prevent a deeply frozen ground condition. Frozen ground doesn't allow snowmelt or rainfall to penetrate the soil column. And so if the soils are dry, the soil temperature can freeze, but there's not the moisture in place from the fall to cause the soil to act like concrete. So overall, I would say that's a good thing for us. Ice cover and freeze up of the streams will occur with sustained cold temperatures, and La Nina does call for a colder than normal winter. However, if the freeze up happens when rivers are low, like they are now, the potential for ice jam breakup flooding is reduced come spring. If the typical La Nina unfolds, then we could see colder temperatures, which might lead to delay in mountain snowmelt come spring, and that would not be a good thing. However, as we all know, the primary factor affecting spring flood potential is the mountain and plains snowpack, and that is yet to be experienced. So we won't have a really good idea of spring flood potential in the basin until later this winter. Next slide, please. And so the National Weather Service issued its winter outlook on 15 October. You can go to that website and read the full document. You can also see or view a YouTube video that explains the document. The National Weather Service Missouri Basin, which is my office, we will release spring flood outlooks in late February and early March of 2021. And you can go to that link that you see toward the middle of the page to see our outlooks come next spring. And also you can go to your local weather forecast office. You can go to their website and they will have spring flood outlooks that are enhanced with local information. And again, those will be released in late February and early March. And with that, that concludes my National Weather Service flood potential comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. I will hand it over to Kevin Brody.
Thank you, Eileen. So I am now on slide 19. So as noted on the slide, the Corps' main priority in regulating the MAINSTEM reservoirs is life and safety. Our operational decisions for the system are driven by runoff, and we make those decisions based on the rule curves in the master manual. We regulate the system to serve the listed 8 congressionally authorized purposes. Some of you may wonder why flood control, navigation, and water supply are noted above the other 5 purposes: hydropower, fish and wildlife, irrigation, recreation, and water quality control. When we make operational decisions for flood control, navigation, and water supply, we are also serving the other authorized purposes. And finally, in making those operational decisions, the Corps will always comply with all applicable federal laws. So now I'm on slide 20. The system is comprised of 6 separate dams and reservoirs in Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota. However, some of our decisions are based on how much water is in all 6 projects, referred to as system storage. So this slide shows the 4 zones, and these 4 zones also exist at the individual projects. The permanent pool is the lowest zone, and it's the minimum amount of water needed to meet authorized purposes such as hydropower. The carryover multiple use zone is the largest zone. It was designed this large to provide water for authorized purposes during long, extended droughts. In fact, the design for the size of this zone was based on the 1930 to 1941 12-year Depression-era drought. I'm going to skip to the top zone, the exclusive flood control zone. As the name implies, if we're in this zone, our operational decisions will be made exclusively for flood control purposes. The annual flood control and multiple use zone is a zone that we hope to be in 365 days of the year. Ideally, we start the runoff season, which is about or on March 1st at the base of the zone, which is 56.1 million acre-feet. As the plains snow melts and the rain falls in March and April, the storage will increase. As the mountain snow melts and rain falls in May, June, and July, the storage level will increase further and peak in early July. During the late summer, fall, and winter, the drier months, we will evacuate this water to continue to serve authorized purposes and start the next runoff season at the base of the zone. As noted, our current storage is 57.3 million acre-feet, which is 1.2 million acre-feet above the base of the zone. So now let's move to slide 21. Our forecast for the 2020 upper basin runoff, which is the basin above Sioux City, Iowa, is 30.2 million acre-feet. This was the October 1 forecast. We just updated that today, and the number is the same, 30.2 million acre-feet, which is about 4 million acre-feet above the long-term average. The upper basin runoff comes from 3 components: plain snowmelt, mountain snowmelt, and rainfall. During the months of March and April, we normally see about 25% of the annual runoff from plain snowmelt and rainfall runoff. During the months of May, June, and July, we normally see about 50% of the annual runoff from mountain snowmelt and rainfall runoff. So we see about 75% of the annual runoff during that 5-month period from March through July. During the other 7 months of the year, we see the remaining 25% of the runoff. As for our forecast for the 2021 runoff, and as Kevin Lau mentioned, the mountain and plain snowpack has just begun to accumulate. We will develop our 2021 runoff forecast in early January. So now I'm on slide 22. This slide shows the annual upper basin runoff since 1898. I'd like to note the variability in runoff over the last 123 years. During that period, we have seen 4 droughts, which are noted in the tan-colored bars. We've also seen some very high runoff years, 2018 and 2019 being the most current. You'll also see 5 dashed lines. Now, Mike's going to talk more about these during his presentation, but briefly, the UD stands for upper decile, which means that 10% of the runoff years are above this line and 90% are below. The UQ stands for upper quartile, or 25%. Median is 50%, lower quartile and lower decile are 75% and 90% respectively. The 2020 runoff is highlighted in red, and it's about an upper quartile runoff. So my last slide is number 23. We will begin reducing Gavins Point releases to winter levels around November 22nd. The navigation flow support ends on December 1st at the mouth, and there's about a 10-day travel time from Gavins Point to the mouth. As we do every winter, the Corps will closely monitor channel and river ice conditions between the system reservoirs as well as the Missouri River downstream of Gavins Point. I noted earlier that some of our operational decisions are based on system storage. Winter releases from Gavins Point are based on the September 1 system storage. So per that storage level, Gavins Point winter releases will be at least 17,000 CFS, and that's about an average winter release. The table on the slide notes the expected average monthly releases from Fort Peck, Garrison, and Gavins Point based on our latest reservoir studies. And that concludes my presentation. I'll now turn it over to Mike Swenson.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Go to the next slide. First slide here shows the current reservoir conditions. This graphic is similar to Kevin's earlier slide and shows the zones at the 3 upper reservoirs, and then also Fort Randall. Fort Peck, Garrison, and Owyhee are currently 3.3, 1.5, and 0.7 feet above the base of their respective flood control zones. Fort Randall is currently at elevation 1344.5. Fort Randall Reservoir is typically drawn down at this time of the year. It is then refilled, it's drawn down to elevation 1337.5, and then it's refilled over the winter, which provides a benefit to winter energy. Next slide. For the AOP simulations or studies, we use the 5 runoff scenarios that Kevin discussed earlier as input to the reservoir model, and then we simulate the regulation of the system through next year. We typically use August 1st as the starting condition. This first graph shows the system storage in million acre feet. The black line is the actual system storage going back to the beginning of the year. The blue line is the regulation based on the median runoff going into next year. The red lines are the upper and lower decile simulations. The AOP contains additional information on the upper and lower quartile runoffs. These 5 simulations give us a range of reservoir elevations and releases that may be expected under various runoff scenarios and are explained in more detail in the AOP. You'll also see the 3 green triangles, which indicate the system storage checks that Kevin referenced. The March 15th storage check sets the service level for the first part of the navigation season. The July 1st storage check sets the service level for the second half of the navigation season and also the navigation season length. The September 1st storage check sets the winter release from Gavin's Point. If you look at the black line, which again is actual, you see we started the runoff year at the base of the annual flood control zone. We captured water during the high runoff periods, as Kevin described, and now that water is being evacuated as we meet the authorized purposes. You can see the black line is currently below the lower decile line due to the recent dry conditions. Based on the most recent monthly study, it's likely that we will start next year slightly below the base of the annual flood control zone. Following the blue line into next year, you see a similar pattern of capturing water and then evacuating that water while meeting the authorized purposes, and then starting the following year at the base of the annual flood control zone. Next slide. So the next three slides here are similar charts for the upper three large reservoirs showing elevation rather than storage. And I won't go into as much detail on these, but they are included for you to look at later. Slide 27 here shows Fort Peck's elevation. One thing I would point out here is that the reservoir rises during the spring under all the runoff scenarios, and I'll touch on that again in a few slides. Next slide shows Garrison, and the slide after that shows Oahe. And again, I would point out on slide 29 that Oahe declines during the spring forage fish spawn under the lower decile runoff. Next slide. So then we'll move on to the project purposes. Again, the draft AOP contains more detailed information on each of these. First, flood control. As you saw in the earlier slide, system storage started the runoff season right at the base of the flood control zone. Storage peaked at 61.8 million acre feet, utilizing 35% of the system's flood control storage. As you also saw in the earlier slide, all runoff scenarios start next year at or below the base of the annual flood control zone. Even with all flood storage available, there's always a possibility of localized rainfall event or events that we can't forecast, particularly downstream of the system due to that large unregulated area below the MAINSTEM reservoirs and also due to the long travel times. The next authorized purpose listed is navigation. Kevin already discussed the plan for the end of navigation flow support this year. Looking out to next year's with the AOP simulations, all runoff scenarios show at least a full-length navigation season, with the upper quartile and upper decile runoff scenarios showing a 10-day extension. Those two scenarios also have above full service flows. That's due to evacuation of water in those scenarios. There will be a full service flow support for median and lower quartile runoff scenarios. The lower decile runoff scenario does show a slight reduction in flow support after the July 1st storage check. Now on slide 31, and hydropower. Hydropower generation under median runoff next year would be 10.1 billion kilowatt hours, which is slightly above the long-term average of 9.4 billion kilowatt hours. The next project purposes are water supply, water quality, irrigation, and recreation, and they all require access to water. Under the median runoff condition, we would expect near average releases and elevations. Under the lower quartile and lower decile scenarios, there may be some issues due to lower releases in localized channel, due to localized channel conditions or due to lower reservoir elevations. Gavin's Point releases in the winter of 21 going into 2022 are 20,000 CFS under the median condition. Winter releases that winter range from 12,000 to 20,000 depending on the runoff scenario. These four project purposes are dependent on elevations and releases, and results may vary quite a bit depending on runoff next year. And lastly, fish and wildlife, including endangered species. Our goal is to provide steady to rising reservoir levels at the upper three projects. Again, that's Fort Peck, Garrison, and Oahe during the forage fish spawn. If we do not have sufficient runoff to keep all three rising, we will favor Fort Peck and Oahe next year. And what I mean by favor is we will adjust releases at Fort Peck and Garrison to try to maintain rising pools at Fort Peck and Oahe. For the terns and plovers, we expect to have typical summer bird operations for median and below runoff. That concludes my presentation. I will turn it back to Eileen.
All right, thank you for those updates. We're going to move into the question and answer period. As I mentioned before, all lines have been placed on mute. I'm going to read the first set of questions that were submitted via our website. The first question comes from Glenwood, Iowa. The question is, will the Corps of Engineers ever explain to elected officials and residents that attempting to turn the Missouri into a ditch for barges has failed economically, and if they really want to stop flooding, they will have to sacrifice some soybeans for wetlands and stop developing the river bottoms? John?
Thank you, Eileen. We'll rephase the question there is basically, has the Corps of Engineers explained the benefits of the navigation? And the answer there is yes. The economic benefits of the Missouri River Bank Stabilization Navigation Project have been published a number of times, most recently in the Missouri River Recovery Program Management Plan Environmental Impact Statement in 2018. These are public documents that have been shared with the public. With respect to flooding, I would like to ask some folks from the Kansas City District to answer that. Ginger, if you're on the line, could you unmute and answer that question? And introduce yourself and what you do.
Ginger, you may need to
Yep, Eileen, can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Hi, I'm Ginger Harper. I'm an outreach specialist in the Kansas City District Corps of Engineers. And to talk about a little bit about what we are doing in terms of flood control along the river. So we're completing repairs to our flood infrastructure damaged in the 2019 flood. We're currently partnering with the states of Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri on two different efforts. One is a short-term effort, a planning assistance to states program, identifying problem areas along the river. And then the second effort is a longer-term effort, a general investigation study that will look to be right now 3 years to develop a plan for more effective and resilient flood risk management for the lower Missouri River. There will be outreach efforts involved in both the short-term and the long-term efforts. So we will be communicating with many stakeholders throughout the region and along the river. Over.
All right, thanks, Ginger. Is there anything else with that question, John?
No, there's nothing else on that question.
Okay, I'll move to the next question, which comes from Sydney, Montana. How can we improve the method in which the Corps shares information? If there's a dramatic alteration to river flow during irrigation season, farmers need sufficient notice to make crop management decisions. It's actually a two-part question, so I'll let you answer that, and then I'll go to the next question.
Thank you, Eileen. In order to answer this question fully, we would need to determine what constitutes a dramatic alteration and what defines sufficient notice, which I would imagine those are very site-specific and probably operational specific. So with that, in the absence of those parameters, I do want to say we do produce a regulation forecast that is referred to as the 3-week forecast that forecasts the releases from all 6 of our reservoirs. We publish that once a week, usually on Wednesday, and more often if needed. At the beginning of each month, or more often if necessary, we produce what we call our monthly studies that forecast the average releases from each of the projects for the next several months. While these forecasts can change significantly, particularly during times of high runoff, the changes during normal and low runoff are less dramatic and can be used as a reasonable indicator of future operations. We also produce every week a weekly update, whether we produce usually on Tuesday mornings and post to our website. where we would post any dramatic changes or any significant changes to operations on that. Having said that, as Kevin Grody pointed out, the system is runoff driven. If there is a change in the forecasted runoff, this change would be reflected in the operations of the project. If there is a significant change in the runoff forecast, we will update the 3-week forecast and monthly studies accordingly. I recommend that anyone that relies on access to the water monitor our website for any changes. Also, if we are planning on making any significant changes to forecasted operations, we generally issue a press release and post on social media. I do need to remind everyone that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers does not assure access to the water. Access to the water is the facility owner or user's responsibility. That's the end of the first question.
Okay. Also, for those of you participating in the webinar, we are including links to these products that John is mentioning within the chat function. All right, the second question. Can conservation districts start receiving press releases that get sent out from the Corps? We begin sharing these notices among our networks via email and post mail. However, we don't always see these notifications with enough notice for irrigation changes. And I'll go ahead and answer that question. We do have links on our website where you can subscribe to receive our press releases, and this particular sender has been added to our distribution list.
Just to follow on that, I encourage interested parties to monitor the Missouri River Basin Water Management webpage. Also, as Kevin Lau pointed out, they do produce forecasts throughout the basin at the Missouri Basin River Forecast Center. So this information is very good for people to look at, and it will be updated. Certainly before we would get a press release out, we would publish something on that, on our website on that. So again, you can sign up for emails or sign up for press releases, but I do encourage people who rely on the river to monitor our site, that is, and the National Weather Service site. That's all.
Okay, and then so far I think we've only had one question submitted via chat, and I think that question is for Doug Cluck. The question is, when were the last years that we faced La Nina?
Yep, and hello. In the chat, I mentioned that 2017 to 2018 winter, if you will, was the last time we did. And if you I don't know if you remember or not, but it was a fairly typical La Nina year in terms of outcome. Cold, pretty darn cold. For the most part in Montana and surrounding areas, and if I remember correctly, relatively wet across much of the basin, mostly upper basin, however.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Matt, Lady, were there any other questions that were submitted via chat that you noticed that I may have missed?
Hi, Eileen. There are no current questions in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this concludes the questions submitted via chat. We'll now field any remaining questions from our callers. To unmute your line to ask a question, you'll need to press *6 on your phone. If you're using the webinar, you need to make sure that you're unmuted both on your computer and on your phone if you have the webinar call you. The force mute function doesn't work, so when you finish asking a question, please remute your phone. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in alphabetical order by state, so please wait for your state to be called. And then please state your name and the organization that you represent before asking your question. We'll start with the state of Iowa. These questions can come from anyone who's on the call from the state of Iowa. So don't feel like you need to wait for a group to be called. Okay, we'll move to the state of Kansas. Again, star 6 to unmute your line. Missouri.
This is Joe Gibbs. Hello.
Hi, Joe. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, I have some questions. I've been reading the engineering circular on the levee safety program. There's a term in there called authorized levee system. Is that all levee systems, federal and non-federal, or is that just federal systems?
Matt Kraske, can you answer that question for us, please? You may need to star 6 to unmute your line.
Hey, Eileen, this is Matt. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, this is Matt Kraske. I am the Readiness Branch Chief in the Omaha District. So, Joe, an authorized levee system in the EC would be a levee system that was authorized by Congress and is in the PL 8499 program.
Okay, the next question I have is on the database, the levee database. I noticed that many of those individual levees had a lot of grossly inaccurate figures and things. Is there a continuous program set up or work set up to update those to get them accurate?
Yeah, Joe, so this is Matt Kraske again. So we do go through and scrub that database on occasion through our continuing inspection program. So as our engineers go through and do the inspections, they go through that database to verify accuracy. So short answer to your question is yes.
Well, what I've seen as far as the length of the levee and the structure and all of that and so on, but the and you know the condition of it, but the historical data that's in there, some of it is really inaccurate. And when you say levee inspections, do they look into the records of the levee district and so on? I mean, what does levee inspection mean?
Well, so Joe, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take it to our levee safety officer, and Eileen can give me a due out to get back to you on that.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Now, the other thing, my last question, I'm concerned about sediment in the reservoirs, and want to ask kind of a weird question, but is there any gold flakes or anything in that sediment that could be mined and help pay for the cost of moving the sediment, or what's the market value? Or really what I'm really asking is what has the Corps been thinking about doing about the sediment?
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to let John Remus answer that question for you.
Well, that was one of the ideas I threw out is we should lace it with gold, and then people would pick it up and take it home with them.
Right.
But that didn't fly. So okay. What we have right now is no solid plan to manage the sediment within the reservoir systems on the Missouri River. Having said that, the Corps of Engineers is trying to develop some tools to look at reservoir sediment management on a national scale, but there's nothing specific for the Missouri River. Now, as Kevin Grody mentioned, that we have that conservation storage or the multi-purpose carryover storage in the system. As the sediment depletes the storage, we maintain the 16.3 million acre feet of flood control storage. So basically, the sediment is eating away at the drought conservation storage there. And right now, that's not a big problem. There's still a lot of storage particularly in the main, the big three reservoirs in the further north. But one day that will be an issue. But right now, we don't have any set plans to do anything with the sediment.
Is it possible that maybe if large floodgates like you would have for a lock and dam, could that be put in a dam and cause some flushing? I know the people down here at the lower end would like a little sand and for their dredging operations and so on. Is that
well, if you look at sediment flushing that's done around the world, and this is not new technology, it's been going on for hundreds of years.
I see.
But what happens is, in order to flush the sediment from a reservoir, you almost have to let the flood through. They don't really, flood control reservoirs don't really provide you a great opportunity for sediment flushing because you almost have to let the flood through. And that, nobody wants that. So.
Okay. I would like to comment on one thing, and that's for Elaine. The acoustics that we are getting are kind of bad. I don't know, but it's kind of hard to hear you sometimes because of the acoustics where you are. There's a lot of echo and so on. But that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks for that feedback, Joe.
You bet.
Any other questions from the state of Missouri? Again, *6 to unmute. Okay, state of Montana. Nebraska.
Oh, sorry, this is Dick Iverson. I was a little slow. Can you hear me?
Sure can. Go ahead.
Yeah, and maybe this is for John or Mr. Swenson, but I guess as an authorized purpose with irrigation, when you say that the water is in the river, basically, but we have to figure a way to get it. To me, the river has changed so dramatically since 2011 and is continuing to change every year. Is there a way we can revisit that where the water that's in the river is going to be adequate for the majority of the pump sites? And I don't want to pick on other authorized purposes, but like dredging or navigation and things like that, we make sure that you have all these structures to make sure the channel is there, that there's adequate water. But for irrigation, it's just kind of a hope and poke thing that you can get your pump in the river. So is there somehow we can visit about that so that we have adequate water volumes so we can get our pumps in the river? These 140, 50 pump sites we have, it really is a difficult thing to have that many people in there messing in the river, in a river that's supposed to be natural, to try to get to their pumps, that we could have just enough flow so we can float these pumps on a normal year.
All right, thank you. What was your name again? I'm sorry.
Dick Iverson. I'm from eastern Montana, below Fort Peck Camp.
All right, thank you. I'm going to let John Remus answer that question.
Thanks, Dick. Just to get back a little bit with the authorizations, the authorization for the Missouri River MAINSTEM reservoir system authorizes support for navigation. The authorization does not provide any particular flow in the authorization for navigation. That is something that our flow targets were developed through the master manual process. So that's how we arrived at our flow targets from downstream. And the bank stabilization and navigation project from Sioux City to the mouth is a separate authorized project specifically to provide a reliable navigation channel. You are correct about that. So the flows that we have, from Port PECK are based basically on what we've come up with through the master manual process. Water supply anywhere, whether it's below Port PECK or below Gavin's Point, the access to that is still the user's responsibility. And the reason for that, I think, is that there is no set standard for that. Some pumps require 2 foot of water, some need 6, some need 10. Trying to build operations for that would be nearly impossible. And also, tributary flows and all of those other things. So we set our flows out of Port PECK based on the runoff there. Now, as we did this last summer and early fall, we did kind of sculpt it a little bit to provide a little more water during the heavy use periods there below Fort Peck, but we did not release more water or less water than we would have released anyway. So that's kind of our restriction there. Can you talk about that? That would be an opening up of the master manual. I don't know whether anybody wants to go there. I don't think I could recommend opening up the master manual for that, because I don't know whether we could come to a solution that would produce much more reliability than we have now.
All right, thanks for your question, Dick. I'm going to return to state of Nebraska. If there were any questions?
From Montana.
Well, he was from Montana. I'd already moved to Nebraska. So, state of Nebraska, again, star 6 to unmute your line if you have any questions. North Dakota?
Yeah, John, this is Michael Bench. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. John, just a question regarding the Title 7 and Title 9 for sedimentation. It's my understanding that the current WRDA bill may be looking at eliminating that, and I was curious as to what the Corps' position on that would be.
The Corps' position will be whatever Congress does. If they eliminate that, then we will obviously not participate in those. As you probably know, the participation and the funding for those two programs have been almost nil for the last several years. So it's really kind of up to whatever Congress does.
Okay, understand. Appreciate the response.
Thank you. Any further questions, state of North Dakota? All right, we'll move to South Dakota. Wyoming. Okay, we've had 2 additional questions submitted via the chat function. The first question is, what are the chances of a full navigation season in 2021? Mike Swenson answer that.
So can you repeat that question again for me, Eileen?
What are the chances of a full navigation season in 2021?
So all of our runoff scenarios shown in the AOP show at least a full-length navigation season next year. So there's a small chance, and that would be kind of like Kevin discussed, kind of like the 10%, the below the lower decile, that we may not have a full-length navigation season. But currently what we're showing in the AOP, they all show a full-length navigation season.
Is that at full service?
The lower decile did show a slight reduction in flow support after the July 1st storage check.
Okay, and then the next question coming from chat from Missouri River Conservation District Council. It says, more soybeans are being grown in the area, which farmers don't begin irrigating until July. That early irrigation window is essential. For other crops like sugar beet, alfalfa, the July to September timeframe is important as well. Farmers always need stability in their water supply, but this 3-month period is especially critical when precipitation is low and temperatures are high. How can we avoid maintenance and testing that hinders farmers' access to water during this prime irrigation season? John?
Yeah. I'm not sure what you mean by maintenance and testing, but again, it gets back to looking at our long-range monthly studies, seeing what our studies show for average releases from whatever project you're interested in, and then monitoring that. You can always ask questions on there, but we are, as Kevin and I have indicated, a runoff-driven system. So if there's an abrupt change in the runoff, that will be reflected. The sooner we know of these issues, the sooner we could possibly make adjustments within the confines of the master manual to lessen the strain on that situation.
This is Mike Swenson. I would also add that we typically try to, the projects try to not have maintenance during that summer period so that we have, most of the units available and things like that. We did have some special circumstances this past summer, like at Fort Peck and a couple of the other projects. But the projects are old and, they do have quite a bit of maintenance going on and, sometimes things just break down and different things like that. So while we try to, have units available during those prime periods for irrigation and recreation and those types of things, sometimes it just isn't possible for all the units to be available for releases.
Okay. There's another comment that was submitted via chat regarding the access issue. In many of these scenarios, accessing the water requires extensive dredging, a timely job, and there is only one dredge to be shared among 100 irrigators. This leaves the other 99 irrigators to use alternatives. Trench work using heavy machinery, a dangerous and not environmentally friendly option. Likewise, this work should require a 310 permit from their local conservation district and permits from the Corps of Engineers, which would likely take 2 to 4 months to receive. If the point of diversion needs to be moved or another pump site volume of flow needs to accommodate an inoperable pump's place of use, it could require a change in water right through the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. By encouraging farmers to simply access water, the Corps is encouraging farmers to sidestep the permitting and water right process and use means that do not benefit the river.
Yes, well, we're not encouraging anybody to sidestep any processes. I think that what we're encouraging is people to be diligent and look out ahead and giving themselves and anybody else involved enough time to get through whatever process you need to get through. Recognizing that once we come out of a prolonged period of high flow, like we've had the last few years, the river channel is going to be different. We understand that. But again, everybody needs to understand that and maybe plan ahead when it gets to the regulatory process.
There's another comment from Dick Iverson. Could we have a visit for Montana and North Dakota irrigators to see if we can get a better way to provide water that is adequate?
We can always have visits. I'm not really sure what you mean by that, Dick, but we can always talk about it. There's no reason not to talk about it.
Okay. All right. So that concludes the questions that have been and comments that have been submitted via the chat, the questions that we've received from callers, and any questions that were submitted in advance of the call.
Last questions.
With that, if anybody else has a question, please press *6 to unmute your line and ask any final questions.
Well, John, this is Dick Iverson again, and I guess it's obvious that we've got a big problem up here below Fort Peck for irrigators, and I think somehow we need to sit down and see what we can do. And I know you were hesitant on the master manual. I don't know what that involves. We were in on the original stuff, but I think we need to visit about this. I mean, this is a serious economic blow up here, and the river, like I said earlier, is changing yearly. And with this big system we have, that irrigation was supposed to be an authorized purpose. With PECK loan, we were supposed to have things that we didn't get. I think we deserve here below Fort Peck to have at least the opportunity to sit down with the powers to be, with the Corps, and try to come up with a solution that's not only beneficial to irrigators but to the wildlife and everything else. So I guess we're putting our offer out there. Can we have such visit, get together, whatever you want to call it, so that we can see maybe there's nothing can be done. And then we have, as you've said in the past or others, maybe we have to go to Congress and get it changed. But at least let's see if we can exercise all the options we have currently legally available.
Dick, this is John Reeves. Yes, we can talk about that. I think a better time to do that would be once we see what the snowpack is shaping up to be, possibly next spring or late winter, when we get a better handle on what exactly is going to happen out there. And then, as stated, you know, your cropping practices are changing. You're planting more soybeans, which changes the irrigation demand, at least maybe shifts it a little bit. So we'd be very interested in learning more about what has changed and what your requirements are, and how we may be able to accommodate that within the confines of the current master manual. But I think trying to settle it here today, there's just too much unknown on our end as far as how much water we're going to have to manage. We can do that next spring or late winter. We'll keep in touch on that.
Okay, thanks, John. And if you could keep in touch with Liv and Julie Gotts and Liv with Missouri River Council and myself and others, we'd be glad to sit down, and we need to talk about this, both long-term and also for the year 2021.
On that, Dick, you just reminded or made me remember something. We will start our monthly basin calls in January, which would be a good time for you or Liv or someone to really engage in those calls when we start to kind of see how the snow is starting to shape up. By January 1st, we generally have an idea of which way we're headed, unless
March 1 is probably...
March 1, we really know where we're headed.
Yeah.
But January 1, we're starting to at least put some educated guesses together.
Well, thanks, John. And if you've got our address or our email, if you send those out, send that notification out.
All right, thank you, Dick. And you do have our contact information as well, so feel free to reach out to us. Any final questions or comments? The first set of questions were submitted via our website. The first question comes from Glenwood, Iowa. Will the Corps of Engineers ever explain to elected officials and residents that attempting to turn the Missouri River into a ditch for barges has failed economically, and if they really want to stop flooding, they will have to sacrifice some soybeans for wetlands and stop developing the river bottoms?
Thank you, Arlene. I will address the first half of that comment. With respect to the economic benefits of the Missouri River Bank Stabilization and Navigation Project, the Corps of Engineers has published those benefits a number of times, most recently in the Missouri River Recovery Program Management Plan Environmental Impact Statement. These are public documents that have been out there for some time. With respect to the flooding, I'm going to ask Ginger Neiman to answer that question. Please, Ginger, go ahead.
Thanks, John. My name is Ginger Harper with the Kansas City District Corps of Engineers as an outreach specialist. We do have a couple of ongoing efforts with regards to lower Missouri Basin flooding. Our first effort is a shorter-term planning assistance to states, or PAS, effort with the states of Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri that's taking a look at some of the short-term solutions for problem areas along the river. The second is a longer-term general investigation study to develop a system plan for more effective and resilient flood risk management along the river. That's a longer, right now, 3-year effort. There is outreach with regards to both of these efforts, so we would encourage folks who are interested to contact their respective Corps districts, either the Kansas City District or the Omaha District, and find out how you can provide input to those studies. Over.
All right, thank you, Ginger. The next question comes from Sydney, Montana. It's a 2-part question, So I'll read the first part, we'll answer it, and then I'll move to the second part. First part of the question, how can we improve the method in which the Corps shares information? If there's a dramatic alteration to river flow during the irrigation season, farmers need sufficient notice to make crop management decisions.
Yes, Eileen, this is John Remus. What constitutes a dramatic alteration or what constitutes sufficient notice is a little hard to answer here because I imagine that would be very site-specific and probably dependent on the flow in the river. But having said that, we do produce a number of forecast documents. We produce a regulation forecast, which is referred to as the 3-week forecast. This forecast is produced at least once a week on Wednesday and more often if needed. And at the beginning of each month, and that 3-week forecast forecasts the releases from each one of our projects. At the beginning of each month, and more often if necessary, we produce our monthly studies that forecast the average releases for each project for the next several months. While these forecasts can change significantly during times of high runoff, the changes during normal or low runoff are less dramatic and can be used as a reasonable indicator of future operations. We also publish a weekly update published every Tuesday that provides a more short-term and concise outlook as to project operations. Having said that, the system is a runoff-driven system. We make our, if there's a change in the runoff or the forecasted runoff, this change would be reflected in our operations of the projects. If there's a significant change in the runoff, we would update the 3-week forecast and monthly studies accordingly. So I would recommend that anybody that relies on access to the water monitor our website, as well as the National Weather Service's website for any changes. If we are planning on making any significant changes at a project or throughout the project, we would issue a press release and post to social media. Those are our current plans. I don't think we change plans drastically. It's something that we know about quite a bit ahead of schedule, unless it's a large hydrologic event that we need to react to, and that usually does not cause access problems for irrigation. I also need to remind everyone that the Corps of Engineers does not assure access to the water. We do release water for purposes downstream, but access to the water is the facility owner or operator's responsibility. Thank you.
Thanks, John. The second part of the question, can conservation districts start receiving press releases that get sent from the Corps? We began sharing these notices among our networks via email and post-mail. However, we don't always see these notifications with enough notice for irrigation changes. And I'll take that. As John mentioned, there are changes that occur without a press release, and so it is very important to watch the website. We do have a curated web app that you can place on your smartphone and check it regularly. We have added this particular person to our mailing list. If you want to be added to the mailing list, just send an email via our website or use the web form to submit your email address and we'll get you added to the mailing list. We typically send one email a month or more frequently if there are significant release changes. But we do ask that you also monitor the website closely. Another question from the internet, it's in multiple parts, so it is also from Montana, and we'll just
read the first one.
Just the first part of the question. More soybeans are being grown in the area, which farmers don't begin irrigating until July. That early irrigation window is essential. For other crops like sugar beets and alfalfa, the July-September timeframe is important as well. Farmers always need stability in their water supply, but this 3-month period is especially critical when precipitation is low and temperatures are high. How can we avoid maintenance and testing that hinders farmers' access to water during the prime irrigation season?
I'll attempt to answer that. The maintenance and testing that we experienced in 2020 here was really an unusual event. Usually the maintenance is scheduled so that we still have the ability to release the flows we need to in the summertime. This was kind of a one-off based on some unusual circumstances at Fort PECK. Having said that, as we said earlier today, these projects are old and sometimes things break down, but generally we look to do the maintenance on our projects in times when we don't need to use the powerhouse for releases. So that's kind of a one-off, and we will take that under advisement.
Okay, the next part of that question. The Corps has an obligation to supply sufficient volumes of flow required for irrigation diversions from the Missouri River. However, when releases were dropped and the river level were dropped approximately 8,000 to 9,000 CFS, and the river level left many irrigators out of water this last irrigation season. The Corps took the position that there was sufficient water in the river, and it was simply the farmer's responsibility to access the water. However, in many of these scenarios, accessing the water requires extensive dredging, a timely job, and there is only one dredge to be shared among 100 irrigators. This leaves the other 99 irrigators to use alternatives. Trench work using heavy machinery, a dangerous and not environmentally friendly option. Likewise, this work should require a 310 permit from their local conservation district and permits from the Corps of Engineers, which would likely take 2 to 4 months to receive. If the point of diversion needs to be moved or another pump site's volume of flow needs to accommodate an inoperable pump's place of use, it could require a change in water right through the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. By encouraging farmers to simply access the water, the Corps is encouraging farmers to sidestep the permitting and water right process and use means that do not benefit the river. How can we prevent these scenarios from occurring in the future? Do we need to define the sufficient volume of flow?
Okay, 3 questions there, or 3 comments. First, we're not encouraging anybody to sidestep any regulations at all. So I think that knowing that you have 100 pumps and that maybe 100 pumps are going to have access problems, there's going to be some maybe work that could be done on the regulatory side well ahead of time in anticipation of having to do something. How can we prevent these scenarios from occurring in the future? Again, that is kind of pre-planning. There is only so much water in the system, so there will be times during times of low runoff where we have low releases. That's just how the system works. Do we need to define the sufficient volume of flow? Well, that is also something that through a lot of input was developed. Our rule curves were developed with public input. If we want to go back and redefine those, we can talk about that, but it still gets down to, was there enough water in the river for irrigation? And the answer was yes. I'm not sure putting more water down the river is going to solve the problem long term. So we can talk about that.
All right, and then the final question, river releases are being altered to accommodate hydropower needs. Why can they not be altered for irrigation, another purpose of the dam?
We, as Kevin Grody pointed out in his first slide, we have 8 authorized purposes, but there are 3 purposes that are kind of on top, and we are in either a flood evacuation mode, which we had been in since March of 2018 until earlier this summer, or we are in a operational mode to meet flow targets. We, on a daily basis, determine how much water to release from each one of the projects. Now, the Western Area Power Administration can shape some of those hydrographs a little bit within reason, but hydropower kind of gets what they get from the release of the water. We don't release more water for hydropower than we would release otherwise. It's still a runoff-driven system.
Okay. So that concludes the questions that were received via our website. I'm going to move to the questions that have been submitted thus far using the webinar chat function. I have two. The first question comes from Responsible River Management and the Coalition to Protect the Missouri River. In 2018 and 2019, the Coalition to Protect the Missouri River respectively requested cutbacks in releases to aid interior drainage and levee rehab. Those requests were both denied due to concerns about carryover into the next year. Now we have low water and navigation problems. How do we do a better job in managing flows for the people that live and work alongside or directly on the river?
Thanks for the question. The system is a runoff-driven system that's operated on an annual basis, and what that means is we do not carry flood water over from year to year. The question has been asked several times, well, can't you anticipate a dry year or a wet year and make adjustments? The system, if we were going to do that, and let's say we anticipated a wet year, we would need to know that really in July of the previous year so that we could empty that water, empty that space in the reservoirs. Conversely, if we knew we were going to go into a dry year, we would need to know that well in advance so we could start conserving water in a year. After the 2011 flood, one of the outcomes of that was a study that the Corps of Engineers worked with NOAA on to determine whether or not we had a skill level that would allow us to do something like that with the sufficient reliability. And the answer to that question was there is not sufficient skill level to predict the switch from a wet to a dry year or a wet from a dry cycle with enough certainty and enough lead time to make those adjustments to the river, to the reservoir storage system. So that's where it stands. So we did ask NOAA again about a year ago whether or not things had changed or whether or not they thought that we knew more. The answer was they didn't think so, but we are exploring that. We're not giving up on that, but we're just not there yet from a ability to predict runoff far enough in advance with enough reliability to do that.
Okay. The next question submitted via chat, I presume it relates to the lower Missouri River. The question is, once the releases are reduced to 17,000 cubic feet per second, how much do we anticipate the river stage to drop on average between Kansas City and St. Louis?
That would really depend on the tributary pickup. I don't know, Kevin Lau, do you have a sense for that? What basically that would be a 17,000 CFS drop, roughly, from what we're doing now. So that's 2 feet, 3 feet. It kind of depends.
Yeah. Can you go to another question? I'll look it up real quick.
That is the last of the chat questions that we have at the moment.
Let's go ahead and open it up on you.
I'm going to go ahead and open up the line to callers, and when you get back to that question, Kevin, just let us know.
Take it up.
Okay. So to move to the question and answer session from callers, I'm going to ask you to wait until your state is called. We're going to go in alphabetical order by state. To unmute your line to ask a question, press *6. And when you're finished asking your question, please mute your line again using your phone's own mute function. Please be sure to state your name and the organization you represent before asking your question. I'm going to go in alphabetical order by state. We'll start with the state of Iowa. You may need to, if you're using the webinar, you may need to unmute on your computer as well as on your phone. Okay, state of Kansas. Star 6 to unmute. Missouri. Montana. Again, star 6 to unmute. Nebraska.
Can you hear me?
We got you, Nancy.
Hey, would someone be able to give us a update on the levee repairs and the navigation system repairs? And then a quick question for Kevin Lau while he's checking on something else there. With the dry conditions, do you have a sense of how many years it's been since we've gone into winter in this good a shape in terms of spring flooding? But that's just if he has it. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start. Matt Kratzke, can you provide an update on levees in the Omaha area? Matt Kratzke, you may need to star 6 to unmute.
Hey, Eileen, this is Matt. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, hey, I'm going to see if Jeff Bolkin is on, the head of our systems restoration team. Jeff, are you on?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, so I'm going to let Jeff go ahead and give an update on the levee, the progress on the levees, if you would please, Jeff.
Yeah, so like Matt said, I'm Jeff Bolkin. I'm the chief of our systems restoration team, which is a team set up following the 2019 floods to restore the system. So where we're at, we remain on schedule with having all of the levee systems at full height in advance of this upcoming flood season. There will still be some repair efforts, such as working on the seepage berms, final grading, those kind of efforts going on throughout 2021. And until we finalize all of those repairs, we're going to have a heightened level of risk out there on the levee systems. But we will continue, like we have been, to monitor the status of the levees, and if for any reason we would need to respond, we would have the appropriate flood fighting activities. So hopefully that gets to the answer to the question there.
Thanks, Jeff. Mike Doolan, can you provide an update on Kansas City?
Yeah, you got me, Eileen?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So overall in Kansas City, given the extent of the damages and the magnitude of damages from the 2019 flood, we're actually making pretty good progress. We're about 40% overall complete with levee rehabilitation. We're on pace right now to be somewhere between 85 and 90% complete with construction going into the spring of 2021. There will be a couple outliers out there that could potentially not have full level of protection restored by next spring. That's Holt County number 9, Holt 10, and Rushville Sugar Lake, all on the Missouri side. Those two Holt County levees, obviously they're in Holt County. The other one's splits the border between Buchanan and Platte County. Now, that being said, Holt 10 was just recently awarded for contract. So there is the possibility that that one could have the breaches restored in time for spring. And then similar situation with Rushville Sugar Lake and Holt number 9. Our team's working real estate waivers right now for those as the levee district tries to acquire the final piece of real estate for us to go out there and be able to begin construction. But we'd like to have those awarded mid-November, or excuse me, advertised by mid-November so we could start construction on them after award and once we get those real estate certs. So overall, we're looking pretty good. We've spent about a little over $30 million in construction efforts so far on levee rehabilitation, and our working estimate right now probably going to come in at around $42 million when it's all said and done to repair everything from a construction standpoint.
Right. Thank you, Mike. James Rudy, can you take the question related to navigation repairs in the Kansas City district? Star 6 to unmute.
Eileen, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is James Rudy with the Kansas City District Corps of Engineers. The Kansas City District has received supplemental funds of about $20 million to work on repair of the structures on the Missouri River. That is less than we had requested. It will do repairs to the most critical features, but will not get them all completed. We are working at some of the most damaged locations right now. Those include Cranberry Bend and Tadpole Bend and Bend near River Mile 90 and some work down at River Mile 24. We will continue to execute those as long as river conditions allow. If we have to pause over the winter due to river levels, we will continue efforts with the funds that we have available come the spring. Over.
All right, thank you, James. And Dave Subcheck, can you provide an update on navigation repairs in the Omaha district? Star 6 to unmute. Dave Subcheck.
Eileen, can you hear me?
Sure can, go ahead.
This is Dave Subcheck with Missouri River Project Office in the Omaha District Corps of Engineers Operations. We have completed 5 repair contracts to date, totaling about $6 million. We currently have 4 contracts in progress. The value of those contracts are about $20 million. Similar to Kansas City, it's about 20 to 30% of our total need. We didn't get the full request, and we do think this is going to take a while to get all the repairs completed. The current contracts we have going on will be running through the bulk of next year and even the following season. Right now, we have no restrictions anywhere above RULO, but we do have quite a few surveys going on to monitor the channel conditions. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Dave. And it looks like Kevin Lau is back. Nancy, can you restate your question for Kevin Lau, please?
Yeah, we went into last winter wet, and I think we went into the previous winter wet. Does Kevin happen to know off the top of his head how long it's been since we've gone into winter with dry conditions that bode well, so to speak, for the spring flood conditions? But that's the only thing he knows. Not a big deal. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Nancy, thanks for the question. I don't know off the top of my head when we went into a spring or a winter dry. I'm going to pass the buck to Doug. Doug, do you remember?
Yeah, passing the buck to me is always dangerous. So it's been a while, Nancy, because if you remember 17 into 18 was incredibly wet, and obviously 18 into 19 was wet. You know, basin-wide, we're pretty darn dry. You know, I'm going to guess 2014, 2013, maybe it was something like that, because 2012 was incredibly dry as well across the basin, but that was record dry. We're not there. We're not even close to that, so don't compare 2012. But I would say a couple years after that, we were still sort of dry. I'll take anybody's opinion. This is my non-scientific guess. I could look it up tomorrow or get a clue about that tomorrow if you want.
Thank you very much. It was a little unfair to spring that on you, so I appreciate it.
Okay, and then Kevin Lau, you want to take that last question that you went to go look up the answer to?
Sure. Yeah. Now that I have an answer to, I guess. If Gavin's goes down to 17, I would expect that the river from St. Joe down to Kansas City would drop about 4 foot, something like that.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Okay.
You know, the one thing you might do is pull up the Kevin Grody's chart of runoff for the basin over the last, whatever it is, 50 years or 100 years, wherever he had there. That may show some of those years just in runoff flow for the entire year, may give us some clue on when the last, time was. And you can see 2012 is a pretty low year in the blue there. Yeah, it's been a while. I'll just say that based on this chart right here.
All right. Thanks, Doug. All right. Any more questions from the state of Nebraska? Okay. Again, *6 to unmute North Dakota. South Dakota. Wyoming. Any final questions before we adjourn?
This is Jason Brandstetter with Capital Sand Company out of Jefferson City, Missouri. Just to clarify on the answer he just gave about the river stage dropping, he stated 4 feet between St. Joe and Kansas City. Do you anticipate that to be similar on down through central Missouri towards St. Louis? It would be a 4 foot drop, or it might be a little less than that?
Thanks, James.
Yeah.
Kevin?
Yeah, that's a good question. It would take me a couple of minutes to figure that out as well. Yeah, it won't be the same. And to be honest, it gets harder to determine once you get below Kansas City because of the tributary impact. I mean, you're gaining drainage as you go below Kansas City, so the tributary inflow is going to have a greater impact on the actual drop than what Gavin's drop is going to be, if that makes sense. But I could try to give a guesstimate, but it would take a while to do that.
Any information would be helpful, and you don't have to provide that tonight. Somebody could email me, later this week.
James, you have my email. Send me an email, and Kevin will send me an email, and we'll get you a response.
Thank you.
All right. Any final questions before we adjourn?
I'll say so.
All right. I'm going to hand the floor to John Remus before we...
Just want to thank everybody for participating tonight. I'd like to special thank you to Doug Cluck and Kevin Lau for their help in putting this meeting together. And, if always happens to me, I go to a public meeting and I leave and I think, oh my God, why didn't I ask this question or make this comment? You can always send questions in to Mike Swenson, Kevin Grody, or myself, or to Eileen, or you can leave them on our Missouri Water Management email address, which are all on the last slide of the presentation. So again, thank you, and I'd like to turn it over to General Helminger if he has any closing comments.
Hey, John, thank you. Brigadier General Helminger here. I just want to thank all of our partners for joining us today. Your questions have been very valuable to us to understand the uses of the system, and just encourage you to continue to stay connected with us now and in the future. Thank you all again.
All right. Thank you, sir. And that concludes our call.